fans and not just people curious. Silly person. But in any case, it's kind of... In fact, the main point, will I ruin it for you? I suppose I will. I'll give you the main point, which you wouldn't find out until the very end, is that these individuals believe in these conspiracy theories, these secret societies that have secret knowledge, and as a result of their interest in that and digging up as much as they can, despite the fact that the societies are fake and never existed, they end up creating the society and end up having the kind of rituals and things that society mythically had. So it's kind of an interesting explore on the nature of human societies. So Umberto Eco, kind of interesting, also on my list. Another one that people have selected for term paper. I just read this one last night. Alister McGrath. He's quite impressive. He's has 3 PhDs, which is kind of interesting. He started out as a scientist and atheist, but because of the nature of science, it impressed him enough to think that there was religious elements and religious truth associated with it. So he ended up getting a PhD in theology, and then another PhD in international studies. And as a result of that, he's not only a scientist, a theologian, and a philosopher. If I'm remembering that correctly, all 3. And he writes a lot of books. I think he's got something like 50 books out there, if you're interested. And one of my favorite books of his is the History of Christianity. In fact, it's the textbook for a lot of courses that study the history of Christianity, so that's kind of fascinating. He's also argued with Richard Dawkins, which is kind of fun. If you've ever heard of Richard Dawkins is an atheist, fond of the flying spaghetti monster idea, etc. But they have a great argument, and it's absolutely clear that Dawkins doesn't know what he's talking about compared to this guy. When you talk about things like the ontological argument, for example, basically Richard Dawkins, his conception of God is that, well, God would have to have evolved. He would be a creature, as well as the explanation for why the universe is here. So that's totally too small, really. His God is too small, in a sense, for that. So Alister McGrath. He's also written books. I have his book, Breakfast with, I think it's Breakfast or Lunch. Maybe it's Lunch, with C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis he's given lectures at we have, I don't know why it's in the United States, but we have a C.S. Lewis library and museum in the United States. You can also visit C.S. Lewis's house in England if you're ever interested. But the museum is in the United States. And it's annoying because whenever they have lectures, they're not online. You know, why can't they just use Zoom like everybody else? But they don't. They want you to physically go to the place, which, you know, who does that anymore? But he's been there lecturing as well. So he's pretty neat. And very, very readable. 50 books, etc. Christian Theology, an introduction, used as a seminary textbook, notice. And I think I have 2 editions of it. I think I gave away my first edition because I got the second edition. But in any case, he's interesting. So, any questions on these folks as I'm going through them? Another one, this one's French, is Alain Badiou. His English is terrible, but he does at least give an attempt to speak in English every once in a while. But his books have mostly been translated. And notice that his book is Being an Event. I don't know if you've caught on to the interesting interplay between philosophers. I suppose it really started with Kant, but with Hegel in his philosophy, phenomenology of spirit, and his Logic, the main book, he begins talking about being and nothingness. And when you look at Heidegger's book, which comes along later, he writes being and time. Sartre, who's responding to Heidegger, refers to being and nothingness. That was the actual title of his book. You have other books out there, for example, Thomas Metzinger, who writes Being No One, because his focus is on the problem of the self. What do we mean by a persistent self? There isn't really one. Instead, we have kind of what Doug Hofstadter calls this strange loop. I'm a strange loop because I'm a series of mental processes that keep, thinking of itself as a self, and yet from moment to moment, of course, the self is constantly in flux depending on how important you think the changes that are going on are. But so Metzinger's book is Being No One. Absolutely hilarious is Slavoj Žižek's book, Nothing, Less Than Nothing. Less Than Nothing. And it's, well, that's hilarious. It's hilarious. He's hilarious. On the flap of his book, his description of the author is Slavoj Žižek was born, writes books, and will die. And that's his whole summary of himself. But this one is Being an Event, and it's actually part one. The second one is why don't they have it? There's a second one. It's a Logic, titled Logic something. But Being an Event, and so what's going on here? Well, being, of course, kind of persists as the topic. What is everything, really, from the point of view of all of them? But then the focus for Heidegger is time, although quite interestingly, it's not really just time, it's also space. You have to understand a certain amount about space in order for that. But remember, after modern physicists have concluded that we don't really have objects, we instead have complex systems in an arrangement of complex systems of energy. So we don't really have objects per se. So for Quine, what we're doing is trying to think of a language that is a predicate language. Because we're, instead of talking about the objects, we use variables and clump the predicates that are associated with those variables. So tall, dark, handsome, whatever your predicates are. So for any x, there is an x such that it is tall, dark, handsome, right? So you're avoiding the problem of having a specific object and talking about the characteristics the object has. His approach is to talk about specific moments in time as an event. So he calls them events. And it's quite complex, but basically he's trying to remap all of our vocabulary so that it's focused on the idea that there's these complex systems that are creating events of interest. And it's our language that is associated with describing those particular events that gives those events the characteristics that they have. So it's, again, our language, trying to figure out how we talk about everything from complex systems at the macroscopic level to the microscopic level, everything in between. It's trying to figure out a way to talk about everything as an event. Have another philosopher, this one originally Dutch, but officially German, I suppose, Peter Sloterdijk. These are all folks that I've had on my list. Peter Sloterdijk. He does the same kind of thing, but he refers to the objects, so to speak, as bubbles. So he talks about bubbles in the small sense, the large sense. You got all these, instead of an event, you've got bubbles, is what he's referring to them as. But they're all doing the same kind of thing. And they're interesting. Peter Sloterdijk, I would say, is quite interesting. I remember one of his essays really shook me when he asked the question, why do people from Western countries like to go touring around the world? Notice that that's not a characteristic that people from other places had. They do now, right? Because this infection, so to speak, this disease has spread. But he started talking about how, as the Enlightenment period, the explorers discovered, that there were parts of the Earth, it's a round ball, so you could figure out this whole area must have something there, but what? We don't know. So they want to sail and go, Magellan, Columbus, all these different, De Soto, all these people traveling around trying to fill in, the blank areas, Captain Cook, visiting Hawaii and Alaska and all these different places, trying to fill them in. People going to the poles, wanting to see what's there, right? Even dying, of course, in the attempt because of the cold and everything. Today, of course, we have Google Earth. You want to see what's on the Earth, you just hover over it with your program and you just look down and there you can see it. In fact, I'm reading a book for a book group right now called the Salt Path, which is about a couple who decide to walk the 650-mile path along the southwestern coast of England, by foot, walk it. And, they start off in Minehold, a little town, so I put on my goggles, went to Google Earth, zoomed in, and you've got pictures literally of the street, with the start of the path, so you can see the monument that's there, and then you can follow the path. Click. I've done this before. One of the ministers at the fellowship that I attend had spent the summer going on the El Camino in Spain, where you start at one place and you walk like a pilgrim from place to place for days until you get to San Jose, right? San Jose? St. James. What's James in? Santiago. Sorry, Santiago. So what did I do? I didn't want to go to Spain. I didn't want to spend all the money and also destroy my feet, because that happens. Everybody talks about how your feet wear out and you get blisters after day 1 or 2, and then you keep going and you destroy yourself trying to do this. I instead sat on my Google Earth app with my goggles on and clicked from arrow to arrow. So I literally walked the whole path, except a couple places where I got lost by just clicking on the pictures, because of course there's people that have taken these pictures of that whole route, so you don't have to actually walk it, you could just follow it. So who the heck needs to actually go to all these places anymore? By the way, the glaciers right around here are absolutely amazing. I don't know if you've ever tried this, but visit Google Earth. You don't have to have the goggles, you could use the program without them, and just look at how the glaciers work and everything. It's just absolutely amazing. But what's crazy about this article is he says this becomes kind of an infection, affecting all these Europeans, and of course now we've got people from Asia that come and are touring here, or tour. A lot of the people that take pictures of places that I like to go visit on Google Earth are Asians taking pictures of things, that are all looking at it. So everybody's catching this bug to want to go and visit places. And I have to admit, when I was younger, I visited a whole lot of places. It seemed neat when we were in